hear what their answer would be. Realizing who could be recognized as the sole winner of the competition, she loudly called out the name of the champion, freshman Henry. According to the rules of the duel, he now has the honor of being 10th on the list of immortals, and no one will be able to displace him from this position for a long time. The master noted with a smile that this young man was the only one in the history of the academy who would enter the top 10 as a first-year student. Then he spread his arms wide and asked the stands to stand to capture the historic moment. Yes, this guy was not called the King of Newbies for nothing, because he turned history upside down, forcing many to look at the possibilities in a new way. Needless to say, all the girls were in love with Henry, and each one would agree to a lot to become his other half. Today the guy experienced a moment of glory, and it was interesting for him to observe what feelings every person in his place experiences. It was the moment he had dreamed of in his past life, but he had no idea that the glory would be so sweet. Even the spirit, who was not usually used to saying flattering words to the disciple, noted that he had made a real breakthrough in the battle. Moreover, the magic wristwatch immediately showed that his combat power had reached rank 30, jumping over many steps at once. In addition, one of the 9 pillars of the Hall of Souls had absorbed the obsession of the spectators in the stands and was almost filled with their energy. But after looking closely at the pillar, the immortal spirit declared that such an aura could not have been possessed by an ancient deity, and that a more terrible creature would soon appear in the world. After all, only a demonic spirit could possess such sinister energy, and it was unclear why Henry had attracted such an assistant to himself. Now Michelle had no doubt that it was Henry who she first noticed near the academy, and perhaps he would inherit the right to become its director. So, the time had come to announce the reward for the champion of the competition, and the master decided not to put the matter off for long. One of the main prizes was a magical artifact from the academy's treasury, and Henry could choose any of them as a reward. In addition, Henry will receive a letter of recommendation from Michelle, and will be able to choose the wish that he likes the most. The third reward was connected to the academy's main secret, but Henry was to learn about this later. Jimmy couldn't hide his joy for his friend, realizing what wealth would come from getting into the academy's treasury, since the worst weapon from there cost 10 million. True, Sophia was not interested in money, and she was happy that her young man remained alive at all. She cheerfully stated that his parents would be proud of him when they found out that he was ranked 10th in the best students. However, they almost kissed when Michelle appeared next to them, asking them to leave their youthful amusements for a while and follow them to the treasury. Watching this from afar, Julia could hardly contain her anger, because Sophia devoted her attention to the guy, completely forgetting about her. But after what she saw in the arena, she admitted that this guy was special and worthy of becoming her first worthy rival in love. And then she confessed to Sophia that she was lucky with the guy, and she was glad that Henry would become a reliable support for her. In response to this, the guy nodded approvingly to Julia and said that her behavior was now worthy of being considered a senior member of the committee. After a short time, they arrived at the very treasury that contained the wealth accumulated by the academy over many years. When the doors opened in front of Henry, the golden gleam that flashed from inside, right into his eyes, made the guy stop. After all, this treasury contained so much wealth that it would have been enough for him for the rest of his life if he had been able to take it all for himself. In addition, there was a huge amount of magical weapons here, and many of the artifacts could serve him in a duel with monsters. Everything was shining and strewn with gold, so it seemed as if a little more, and the guy would go blind from this light. He found it hard to believe that he could choose anything he wanted. But first, Michelle wanted to ask him something. Turning to her, he cheerfully replied that he was ready to tell her anything, just so that he could start choosing the winning prize as soon as possible. At that moment, she said with a smile that she had long been tormented by the question of who was that unknown genius last week who caused the funnel. But suddenly the guy decided not to confess to her, and said that he was hearing about this incident for the first time. Then the girl said with disappointment that if it were him, she would have allowed him to take a couple more treasures from here instead of one. Yes, it made him think, because 2 gold treasures at once could bring him so much money that he wouldn't have to work. However, this student was always calculating and asked the girl to raise the reward to 3, after which he would be ready to confess to everything. Of course, this in itself meant his confession, although Henry asked her to keep it a secret and not to reveal his abilities. At some point, it seemed to her that this guy simply could not inherit the position of master of the pavilion, because the student did not have a penny to his name. The girl had no idea that Henry's main task was to increase combat power, and that the position would allow her to do this faster. While he was in the storage, the immortal spirit reminded him that there might be an ingredient here that would speed up his cultivation by 30 years. And with the help of the spirit's vast experience in alchemy, he could easily create a magical elixir from the ingredient. Surely everything could be found in this treasury of the century-old academy, and even ancient arterial grass could have ended up in one of the chests. Having quickly found the necessary ingredients, the guy realized that he could now get everything else to prepare the most complex potions. However, it remained to decide what to choose as the final prize for winning this brutal competition. And at that moment, he saw in the far corner of the storage something that could be more useful to him than any, even the rarest, rhizomes. Right in front of him, he saw a stone statue and realized that this artifact could be an ancient spirit stone that contained his remains. In addition, on the stone slab he saw a small vessel, inside of which were indeed the remains of that saint and could contain his immortal soul. Without a second's hesitation, he chose them as a gift and told Michelle that he was taking the remains for himself. Of course, the girl was not against giving the guy the well-deserved prize, but she warned that the relic contained very powerful mana. Henry understood everything perfectly well, even without explanations, because he knew all the properties of these remains and could not allow them to lie here without use. By the way, Michelle herself found these remains in the ruins, and they had to be brought to the treasury for safekeeping so that no one else could get to them. Here Henry suddenly interrupted her, reminding her that, according to the terms of the contract, he was entitled to a third reward. But unfortunately, the secret that Michelle had to reveal to the winner was connected with another secret of the Academy, and she promised to tell about it a little later. In fact, it was offensive, and, looking her straight in the eye, Henry said that it was not nice to go back on your words. But realizing that such jokes were bad with this formidable girl, he quickly ran out of the treasury, realizing that such reproaches could make her lose her temper. Remembering the past, he suddenly realized that the last time he got the ashes of this saint in a completely different place, and it was unclear why the events of his life had changed so much. But for some reason, the immortal spirit believed that this relic was just a decoration and was completely useless for his ward. Then the guy turned sharply to him and declared that the spirit did not even know who these ashes belonged to. And then he said that these ashes belonged to a supreme Buddhist being, equal in power to the immortal spirit. The spirit was even confused by this confession, realizing that this student had started something strange and had been hiding his plan from him for a long time. He couldn't understand why Henry needed these ashes. Was he really going to summon the spirit of the deceased with the help of a ritual? In his past life, it took him 10 years to find this sacred relic and summon the strongest heroic soul, but this time, the relic itself fell into his hands. Although it was too early to predict, since the probability of failure was still very high. The next day, Edward rushed to the student union office, ready to meet in person with whoever could fix the situation. Before him stood the student who had recently been disgraced by Henry, and who was probably still thirsting for revenge. Of course, it was Charlie, who, although he dreamed of taking revenge on his enemy, did not understand how exactly he could do it. After all, if Edward was hinting that he should ask his father to kill Henry, then the director would definitely not leave it unpunished. But that was not the point, and Edward suggested using the academy students for this purpose. And although the boy did not yet understand which of the students was capable of fighting him, Edward advised him to do what he said. He reminded that there is one person who occupies third place on the list of immortals, and it is with his help that their plan can be realized. Meanwhile, Henry met his girlfriend after a short separation, and Sophia asked what reward he had chosen. But before she could finish speaking, the roar of a motor was heard nearby, and it became clear that someone wanted to talk to Henry. A second later, a red sports car pulled up next to them, but it was unclear who was inside. The man behind the wheel controlled the car with the ease that only a true master of driving could do. However, to his surprise, Catherine stepped out of the car, seeking to meet him to ask for a favor. Of course, this made Henry laugh, because after everything that happened, it was he who should be asking her for something, and not the other way around. But the girl gently touched his face with her hand, saying that this was not quite what he thought. After all, last time he helped the development of her pharmacy business so much with his elixir that even her father wanted to meet Henry at a big festive banquet. Besides, exactly a week later, it was Catherine's birthday, and she hoped that the guy wouldn't refuse to come. Of course, he could not refuse the girl this request, and promised that he would definitely come to her estate. Immediately after this, the girl got into the car and, wishing the young people a good day, left on business. True, Sophia did not share the guy's joy about the invitation, not understanding where he managed to meet this girl. And then she looked him straight in the eye, saying that meeting the daughter of an influential family did not seem like a simple coincidence to her. Of course, she didn't jump to any conclusions, so she decided to leave this conversation for now and just go home, where her parents were waiting for them. It was a great suggestion, especially since Henry was hungry and was curious about what his mother had prepared. He suddenly ran to the house and called her with him, although it seemed to Sophia that the guy was moving away from her every day. But she forgot to tell him that she had moved to the 9th level of development, but she promised herself to tell him about it next time. As she stood alone in the middle of the street, she was watched by the immortal spirit, who knew that only 2 months had passed since Henry's reincarnation. And after the start of their close communication, the girl's level grew so rapidly that she, too, could be called a genius that no one knew about yet. These two, along with his ward Henry, increasingly became a mystery to the immortal spirit that he could not solve. It was so fresh on campus this morning that it seemed like the weather itself was calling the students to take a walk and forget about their studies, at least for a little while. But recently, Henry could hardly walk down the street calmly, because all the girls' eyes were riveted on him. None of the students let him pass by without a reason, because everyone wanted to date this new star of the academy. At some point, he realized that a crowd of girls was ready to rush at him and strangle him in their embrace. Of course, he couldn't refuse them rudely, but now his friends were standing in the distance with Sophia, and he felt a little awkward in front of them. Turning to Sophia, Jimmy suddenly told her that Henry had spent a lot of effort choosing a gift from the treasury, and the girl should congratulate her boyfriend in person. However, in response, she moved away, not understanding since when all these girls started hanging around Henry. Meanwhile, the guy was running away from a crowd of female students in love, and shouted loudly to his friends not to leave him alone. On the way, he explained to the immortal spirit that this was always the case in his past life, so he should get used to it. It would be nice to feel like a hero sometimes, but there is no time to relax now because the mutants will attack in 20 days. Even the slightest mistake in the battle with the immortal witches could cost one's life, so it was worth thinking about this especially carefully now. The next person Henry wanted to find was Logan, the best fighter of the ancient martial arts club and the third on the list of immortals. But now it was more important to finish work on the magic pills that would increase combat power and help summon a second heroic soul. It will take a long time to complete the work, namely 2 days of continuous work. At that moment, the very guy Henry was thinking about entered Michelle's office at her invitation. Michelle realized that Logan had come for a new assignment, and she had just the thing for him. This young man's working conditions have always been the same, and he is willing to work if the pay is high enough. He didn't have to worry about payment, but now he had to save a hostage and get $5 million in cash for it. But Michelle warned him that the task was very dangerous, even for a master like him. Yes, Michelle was very kind today, but Logan didn't need her care and simply took his next task. She asked why he had already taken on the 4th mission of such a high level in the last year. Did he really like taking such risks? Michelle had a suspicion that he was acquainted with the winner of the recent competition, who had defeated all the leaders of his club, and probably wanted to meet Henry in person. Logan knew very well how Henry fought, because he secretly watched every one of his fights from the stands of the training arena. Then Michelle asked him for a favor to calm his ardor and not touch Henry, for which she would be very grateful to him. To her surprise, Logan replied that she had nothing to worry about, because his clan members had disgraced themselves, and he had no intention of taking revenge on them. Without wasting time on conversation, he went to the abandoned factory where the prisoner was being held. The captive turned out to be a small boy who was already being abused by the gang leader, who was holding a bloody knife in his hands. Hiding, Logan immediately assessed the level of combat power of each of the 4 fighters surrounding the boy. Logan knew that his opponents were strong, as 2 of them were equal to him in strength, while the other 2 were slightly weaker. But once he had taken on the task, it was too late to retreat, and soon the bandits heard a loud noise from above. Then they realized that they were facing a powerful magician, because huge roots began to grow right from under the stone floor. These roots could tear anyone to pieces if they did not manage to dodge them in time. After examining the roots, one of the bandits realized that they had been using a woodcutting technique that only one person owned, and this man most likely worked for a criminal bureau, where only the strongest fighters from the list of immortals served. He was not mistaken, because Logan had dealt with the same villains more than once during his long service. Logan could not only attack with the ancient roots, but also become nearly invisible to any of them. Finally, one of the bandits pulled himself together and said that panicking was the worst thing to do now. But he didn't have time to finish, because the next moment his head was pierced by Logan's magic arrow. Only after his comrade's death did his accomplice realize where the arrow had come from. He didn't see Logan, but he still tried to swing his axe into the void, but only managed to chop off a few roots. The bandit was sure that someone had been standing there a second ago, but probably moved abruptly after the start of his attack. While they were trying to find Logan, the roots managed to grab the 3rd member of the gang and, most likely, it was no longer possible to tear him out of these bonds. The worst thing was that their little hostage was the main target of the unknown, and they couldn't just hand over their prey to him. At the last moment, noticing that his comrade was heading towards the roots, the bandit ordered him to immediately return to the shelter and not stick his head out. But it was too late to talk about it because the second bandit suffered the same fate and was instantly pierced by a magic arrow. Logan acted as usual and destroyed the bandits one by one, identifying the next target. The target was one of the bandits who had been following every trace of the invisible warrior for a long time and was already ready to use the ability of the water wall. Noticing the activation of this magic from afar, Logan prepared his next arrow to hit the water ball before it could grow. The arrow he fired hit a few roots, but for Logan, it was minor damage. He was willing to sacrifice them. And the main thing is that immediately after this, the arrow hit right in the center of the water ball, where the big guy was. It became clear that the bandit now had no way to use his ability and would soon find himself outside his barrier. And so it happened. The water balloon burst, and the big guy fell onto the stone floor of the abandoned factory. However, this